Wagwan. Good morning, good night, welcome back. And if you're listening for the first time, welcome to episode 16 of The Real Situation, where we give you a taste of Jamaican politics. Since we met last, one bag of headlines flooding the media. We're going to touch on a few, but you know how we do. I'm your host, Melanie Byfield, and in this series, it's all about Jamaica's road to becoming a republic. Historic! Malahoo Forte tables bill to amend constitution to replace King Charles with Jamaican president. That was the headline in the Jamaica Observer on December 10. The article went on to quote, and I'm just going to call it MMF, right? Malahoo Forte. The article went on to quote MMF, who said, "The tabling of the bill marks the greatest progress made so far in our effort to reform the Constitution of Jamaica to achieve the national goals of having a Jamaican as head of state instead of the British monarch, and also having our supreme law taken out from under the cloak of the Imperial Ordering Council and placed in proper form." It's supposed to be joyous, right? No, but it coming like the weather right now. Overcast, sun now shine, and it well dreary. Shouldn't everything be taken out from under the cloak of the Imperial Order in Council too? What's the benefit of having the supreme law taken out and leaving the highest court? Remember, there's a deadlock, because the PNP have insisted that the British monarch and the Privy Council should be removed at the same time to make this a full cutting of colonial ties with Britain. But on that issue, the government said, make we deal with that later. Check me in affairs too. Actually, on this subject of the Apex Court, Silburn Sidiel did a great show. Really good discussion. I'm going to put the link on the podcast page. It's called "Why is Jamaica Holding On to the Privy Council?" He was reasoning with a barrister called Matundo Makulu, and they were pointing out the fact that, look, the Caribbean Court of Justice has equally competent and qualified people within the region to sit on the court. And while you're not trying to bash the Privy Council because they've served us well, it's a colonial court. Or as Silburn says, it's a bastion of slavery. Why hold on to it if the aim is to decolonize Jamaica? In the Gleaner on December 2nd, A.J. Nicholson, who's a former Minister of Justice of Jamaica, wrote an article called "Descendant of Enslavers, Beam in Whose Eyes?" I'm going to read you a little part from that article. It says, "That court of His Majesty, himself descended from traders in slaves, sitting in London, inaccessible to the vast majority of our citizens, has the final word on the guilt or innocence of their petitioners, descendants of slaves." We know about the beam in your eye business, right? That come from Matthew 7, verse 3 through 5. And he's basically saying, don't be a hypocrite. You're telling people, to vote against the white Englishman who was born in Jamaica, but you're clinging to the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council, who are the direct descendants of the people who enslaved and still colonized Jamaica, and who determine the highest law of the land. Let's jump back a week, right, to when MMF gave an update on constitutional reform. It was on December 3rd in the House of Representatives, and she described the draft bill to reform the Constitution as far advanced. Now, as of that date, the opposition leader said he hadn't even seen a draft, and he criticised the administration for a lack of consultation. He made it clear that his side's concerns were still unresolved. He said, "This is a situation where one hand simply cannot clap. And without the support of this side, this process is going nowhere." It's interesting that the opposition hadn't seen a draft because the public hadn't seen one either. Transparency matters, right? The one thing I'll say I like about Cudjoe and his versions of his draft constitution is they were online for the public to see. So now the bill's been tabled, it's going to sit for 3 months before the debate starts in the House and then later in the Senate. The government has the numbers to get it passed in the House, but they're going to need opposition support to get it approved in the Senate. Ultimately, there's going to be a referendum, and that's going to be needed to approve the whole reform, right? But before the debate, a joint select parliamentary committee, that's a temporary committee that looks at a proposed bill in this case, is going to be established, and they will review and report on the bill. So you might be asking, why table the bill now when, there's at least one very critical area where there's no consensus, right? And other areas where the public have issues like impeachment, fixed election dates, right? Feels rushed, right? Then there's also the fact that an election can be called anytime between now and September 2025. So how does that affect the timeline? Well, here's what MMF said. She said, at this juncture, it cannot be about how we feel because of where we are in the life of the Parliament. There is still enough time to get it now. And if we give up now, it's going to be a betrayal of what we hope to achieve and the goals we've set as a nation. Betrayal. We're going to come back to that word, betrayal. Okay, so the bill tabled in Parliament is called An Act to Repeal the Jamaica Constitution Order in Council, 1962, and to provide for the legal recognition and operation of the Constitution of Jamaica, notwithstanding the repeal of that order in council, to amend the Constitution of Jamaica to provide for a non-monarchical head of state, thereby establishing Jamaica as a republic, to make other amendments in respect of certain provisions of the Constitution of Jamaica, and to provide for connected matters. So basically to take out the old constitution, bring forward the new one, remove the monarchy, bring forward a new Jamaican prezi, establish Jamaica as a republic, and some other amendments. So why is the bill being tabled? Yeah, because after 62 years, independent Jamaica still has an English king. The constitution is a colonial document, and the part that's critical but not included by the government is that Jamaica's highest court of appeal is the Privy Council in London. So right now we're in phase 1 of 3 phases of the reform. Amending the constitution, removing the monarchy, and because the amendments are deeply entrenched, there needs to be a referendum when the people of Jamaica will say yes or no to that bill that was just tabled in Parliament. Remembering there was a 15-member Constitutional Reform Committee, right, that submitted a report in May this year, 2024. And like I mentioned earlier, the two political parties disagree about Jamaica's final court. So Mark Golding did not sign that report, right, on the basis that while retaining the Privy Council in London, Jamaica's not fully independent. And what he's advocating for is that the Caribbean Court of Justice be put in its place, right? And don't forget, this is a court that Jamaica actually helped to set up and contributed about $27 million to. What a rush. When the CRC's report was filed in May 2024, we heard there was going to be a ramped up public education effort, right? How many more parishes have had town halls since? Did anyone come to your parish? None that I'm aware of. And how many schools were visited and educated on this subject and this process? Oh, there was actually one. St. Hilda's on December 5th. So of the 14 parishes in Jamaica, town halls were only ever held in Mandeville, Manchester, Port Antonio, Portland, Montego Bay, St. James, Santa Cruz, St. Elizabeth, and Kingston, and a handful of over 180 high schools over a 2-year period. So how were the public feeling? Here's an excerpt from a Jamaica Gleaner article back in June by Robert Daly of Mobay. So this would have been done little after this CRC report was dropped, right? He says, constitutional reform can deepen our democracy, or it can concentrate more power in the hands of politicians, deepening authoritarianism and driving us towards dictatorship. Vigilance is needed. For maximum public buy-in, all constitutional matters for reform should be discussed and agreed on before the referendum to avoid the puss-in-a-bag syndrome. Then we all know what we are supporting. The gin-owl-ship here is that the government is claiming that a few 30-second jingles equates to public education, and that 3 what they call town halls, where the CRC advises the small audience of what they plan to do, equated to public consultation. No one is fooled. You know what, this process feels like something from 1962, when the Independence Bill was already done and dusted, and the people of Jamaica weren't properly consulted. I actually give more credit to the 2 separate reasonings done by Bruce Golding and PJ Patterson, 2 former prime ministers from opposing parties, right? That felt more genuine. Okay, so what's in this bill? Going to give you a rundown, but dive deeper into it in coming episodes, right? So, it repeals the Jamaica Constitution Ordering Council and saves the Constitution of Jamaica. What it means by that is the existing constitution is made up of 2 schedules. So it gets rid of the first schedule and keeps the second schedule. What I didn't see, though, is what happens to the public service, judicial service, police service, and Jamaica Constitution, Retirement and Entitled Officers Regulations Law. All of them are from 1961. They were in the first schedule. I don't know what happened to them. Or what they were replaced by, I should say. What else is there? There's the insertion of a preamble in the Constitution. It repeals Section 1 and 2 and replaces it with a new Interpretation Act. It repeals and replaces Section 8, which talks about depriving citizenship. It repeals and replaces Sections 9 and 10, which talks about renouncing citizenship. It repeals and replaces Section 11, which talks about powers of Parliament. It amends Chapter 4, which deals with the governor, which would now deal with the president. I'll just say something. All those provisions relating to the president are under some heavy scrutiny. You want to make sure that the Prime Minister don't end up appointing that person, his or herself, right? And then there's also an issue of what power that person ultimately has. So what else does this bill propose? It deletes references to the Crown or the monarch. It repeals and replaces Section 34, which addresses the establishment of the Parliament. It changes Parliament of Jamaica to President, Senate, and House of Representatives. It repeals and replaces Section 35, which increases the number of senators to 27. It amends Section 37 and 39, and that talks about qualification to sit in the House of Representatives and the Senate. It amends Section 40, which talks about the disqualification for the House and the Senate. It repeals and replaces Section 49, which talks about how the Constitution is amended. It amends sections 55, 58 and 59, which talk about the introduction of bills, and repeals and replaces section 60, which talks about the assent to bills. Now, the amendment to section 64, there's only one way to talk about this part, and it starts with a F and it ends with UCRI. PJ thought so too, right? PJ said, I am not for that. If we can have a general election in the middle of a pandemic, I don't see any reason why there should be an exemption that would permit the life of the legislature and a denial of the people of the right to choose for 2 years in those circumstances. Basically, what that tries to do is extend the life of the parliament in the event of, anyway. Like I say, that start with F and end with OCRI. Amending Chapter 5 is the next thing. And that's to add the Electoral Commission of Jamaica. Repeal and replace Section 8. That talks about the Executive Authority of Jamaica. And the new Chapter 9 is the national items. So what about the input of the people? So, the Prime Minister, in a campaign rally in Montego Bay, had said that within the first 100 days of government, this is what I'm saying, we will start the legislative process to fix the date for general elections in Jamaica. This will bring greater certainty to the political process, given that Section 64(2) of the Constitution, which sets out the life cycle of the Parliament, is a deeply entrenched clause. Jamaicans would have to confirm any change in a referendum. Now, with 8 out of 10 adult Jamaicans in support of fixed date elections, that's what's known as a bat up and catch, right? That's if you're listening to the people of Jamaica. And as we just read, no one ain't, because fixed date elections doesn't form part of this bill. By the way, on the subject of elections, if you're not registered to vote, March 31, 2025 is the deadline to register for the next voters list, which is scheduled to be published by May 31, 2025. I feel like there's been a real missed opportunity here, right, to bring the country together. Don't get me wrong, because I want Jamaica to be fully independent, right? Free from colonization and all of that. And yes, this is historical, but the journey isn't a pleasant one. All right, let me tell you a story. Years ago, me and my big son left Mobay and went to Negril. And why? The ride was so bumpy, I literally thought I was going to throw up, right? Thankfully, when we reached, we had a good time still. I mean, Negril well pretty, so, But this is how this journey for constitutional reform feels. And let's circle back to that word betrayal. Because the media, in the last couple of weeks, there's been plenty of what could be considered a betrayal of what we hope to achieve and the goals that we have set as a nation, right? So December 3rd, we had the National Environmental and Planning Agency and Tradewinds Citrus saga, right? The resignation of the NEPA chairman, Weldon Madden, after he lied to the Jamaican people about his knowledge of the ending of the prosecution against Tradewinds, right? In a non-disclosure agreement that he signed. Breton Shaggy. And I say, it wasn't me. What happened was back in December 2023, there was heavy fuel oil from a boiler at a plant the Tradewinds owned, and it leaked into the Rio Cobre River, right, in St. Catherine. Last week in court, NEPA told the judge that, Judge, case done. And the judge was like, okay. So let me see a copy of the agreement. But she was told the agreement was confidential, right? And she couldn't see it. So when I first heard that, I'm like, hold on a little bit. What can go so? Judge can't see agreement, can't secret. Okay, NEPA. NEPA is a public agency, right? It's supposed to be acting in the public's interest. So what's the secret? Well, the public was like, not a damn of that. Hi, Auntie. I'm an anti-words them. And the agreement was published. And Mr. Madden resigned because it turned out he signed the agreement that he claimed he knew nothing about. Straight sellout. That was the headline, right, from the Gleaner. Because when you looked at that agreement, it said that Trade Winds didn't admit any liability. Nobody couldn't bring no claim against them in the future. What about the rights of the communities that live around the Rio Cobre? And check this part. Taxpayer catch a next lick. Each side was responsible for their own legal costs, which means that taxpayers then had to pay the costs of NEPA, their court costs. So how do you have a settlement agreement, right? Where the agreement didn't set out anything that Trade Winds was supposed to do. There was no monitoring process. So what it basically is showing is that there's a failure to uphold Jamaica's environmental laws and hold polluters accountable, sending a very dangerous message, right? That environmental crimes can be settled behind closed doors without fear of any real consequences. Okay, next saga. December 5 in the Gleaner, 3 trillion crisis. A review by the Auditor General for reports of 16 government entities by the government watchdog JAMP, Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal, revealed a staggering $3 trillion in spending that was unaccounted for over a 6 to 11 year period. So JAM's deep dive determined that for 9 years the education ministry hadn't given an account for spending that totaled $902 billion. For 10 years, the health ministry spent $695 billion and hadn't provided one document. And the Labour and Social Security Ministry hadn't accounted for $53.4 billion. The finance minister said that the departments are just behind and they need to catch up. Question, is there any department on your job that's 6 to 11 years behind on anything? Listen, whether incompetence or theft, any way you swing it, 300 trillion accounted for? What can really go so? Actually, JAMP are pretty good. On their website, there is a link I'm going to put on the front of the podcast page. It's called the Accountability Imperative, and it's a link to a letter that constituents can send to their Member of Parliament, and it calls for a bill on the bill on constitutional reform to include a provision to remove parliamentarians who don't perform, and or to remove them for misconduct. It references a poll done by Don Anderson, which said that 88% of Jamaicans 18 and older want a mechanism to remove underperforming members of Parliament, right? And the letter basically says, look, at which other workplace can an employee be absent for more than 50% of the time and you ain't sick and you ain't, doing business of the company, and be assured of getting paid at the end of the month? Yeah. I actually watched a sitting of the Senate the other day, and there's 21 senators, right? And there's 13 on the government side, 8 on the opposition side. And in this sitting of the Senate, I think 7 were present for the opposition. And of the 13, there was 7 who were present for the government. So that left me wondering, why, number one, why wasn't there full attendance? And second, I'm wondering what else senators actually do, because the bill suggests their number needs to be increased to 27, right? More important than an impeachment provision or, fixed election dates. The interesting thing was at the beginning, there was an explanation at the beginning of the sitting of the Senate. There was an explanation of what the constituent development policy was. And it basically explains how an MP has access to funds for community development. So under the CDF policy, an MP has to hold a meeting. It used to be every year. I think since 2016, it's now every 2 years. So you hold a meeting to discuss projects that are needed in the constituency. And projects are not approved without that community development meeting. Funding for the projects go directly from the Office of the Prime Minister to one of the 26 government agencies that implement these projects, not to the MP directly. There are 6 project categories with spending limits for each. And an MP is required to do no less than 5, but no more than 20 projects each year. A report must be submitted as well, disclosing how those funds were spent. Now, there's 63 members of Parliament, right? I went on the JAMP website, which has this CDF information. Thank you, JAMP. And I made a note of the MPs who had submitted their reports, right? It's all very well having meetings, but the thing is to improve the constituency, right? So, and especially if you're given the money to spend. So I'm not going to mention who had meetings. I'm mentioning who submitted reports showing what they did in their community, right? And I've done it in the order of who had the most boom and detailed report. And I must say, if your name ain't mentioned and you did all leap or JAMP don't have your report for some reason, hush. So first is Julian Robinson. He submitted 5 reports. Boom, 5 boom reports, I must say. Next came Malahoo Forte, 3 very detailed reports. And the next 4 people had 1 report each. Mark Golding, Robert Miller, Juliet Cuthbert-Smith, and Anthony Hilton. So out of 63 MPs, in the absence of any other, reason, there were 6 people who submitted CDF reports. And some of these reports go back to I think Juliet Cuthbert-Smith's was 2015, 16, something along those lines. But not all of them were super recent reports, right? Let me just check and can tell you. So, yeah, Juliet Cuthbert-Smith's report was 2016, right? Mark Golding's was 2022. Anthony Hilton's was 2016. Robert Miller 2021, and Angela Brown Burke's was for the year 2019 to 2020. And yeah, of course, you can ask your MPs about these CDF meetings and reports. Continuing with our betrayal, sagas of betrayal, right? December 7, the court said no to Andrew Holness. He lost his bid to try and force the Integrity Commission to certify his 2022 and 2023 statutory declarations. He can seek judicial review to see if the Integrity Commission's investigative report and special report are to be invalidated. But basically, this stems from the report that the Integrity Commission tabled that raised concerns about his statutory declarations. They couldn't conclude on issues unexplained financial discrepancies in his 2021 income filings. It raised concerns about tax compliance and transactions over 470 million involving connected companies. And he basically initiated a judicial review proceedings to get the court to terminate all investigations into his financial affairs and invalidate the report, strike down certain provisions of the Integrity Commission Act and sections of the Corruption Prevention Act, which are used to probe illicit enrichment. He is deeming those as unconstitutional. Justice Jarrett said, "The court cannot and will not usurp the decision-making powers of public bodies and public officers, and therefore, basically, it nagoso." They go back to court in January. Next saga, December 14, Marissa Dalrymple Filbert, newly re-elected Jamaica Labour Party Member of Parliament for Trelawney Southern. She's facing trial March 31 next year in connection with allegations of false statements in her statutory declarations. The Integrity Commission determined that she breached the Parliament Integrity of Members Act and the Integrity Commission Act after she didn't mention in her statutory declarations for 6 years the fact that she purchased a 2015 Mercedes-Benz and used her 20% duty concession privilege to buy the car for her sister. Allegedly. December 15 saw more drama. The IC report and Estate Bridge saga. So Beverly Hills townhouses were constructed by Estate Bridge Holdings, right? A company linked to the Prime Minister. His company Imperium held shares in Estate Bridge up to October 2022. Now, Estate Bridge is alleged to have violated a building permit issued by the Kingston and St Andrew Municipal Corporation. The IC report tabled in Parliament concluded that the breaches were deliberate and that the directors of Estate Bridge are liable. And to make it worser, the directors of the company are the Prime Minister's business partner, Norman Brown, who happens to be the chairman of the UDC and the HAJ, right? Both offices of which report to the Prime Minister. Director number 1. Next director, Sidya Anderson, who is the Prime Minister's sister. And the next director, Adam Holness, son of the Prime Minister. In a sitting of the Senate, the same one when we watch, December 13, opposition spokesman on housing, Professor Floyd Morris blasted the chairman of the UDC, Norman Brown, for his involvement in the building breach and called for his immediate resignation. He referenced a case of the former president of the National Water Commission, where it was said there was a clear intention on the part of this guy, Mark Barnett, and his wife, Annette Francis Barnett, to violate the terms of a building permit, of a building and planning permit. That was alleged by the DPP. Barnett was placed on administrative leave by the NWC. And the Integrity Commission's scathing report labelled his actions as egregious. But in a turn of events, DPP say, whoops, time's up. This was the DPP. It having not been initiated within 12 months, right? The prosecution of the case didn't take place within 12 months of the breach identified, and now the criminal action is statute barred. So therefore, there can be no prosecution. What can go so? There's more. December 5, the Gleaner runs an article. PM labels Jamaica's poor roads national emergency and allocates $2 billion for repairs. The Prime Minister says it is indeed a crisis and every Jamaican is of that view and it should be dealt with as a crisis, as an emergency. Yes, PM, every Jamaican is of that view, including the person in this next article. The chronic weight of inefficiency and corruption. This article says, our roads have been in a disgraceful state for years, with very little of consequence being done about it. For the most part, our bad roads have their foundation in the use of insufficient material, lack of road construction expertise in some instances, poor maintenance, neglect and blatant corruption involving kickbacks. We believe it is imperative that by whatever means necessary, suitable ongoing maintenance of all roads, more especially our main roads, should be compulsory. As a nation, we must strive with might and main to put an end to chronic inefficiency and thievery in governance. Continuing, hotels and junior doctors were striking because of low pay. Disrespect between the political parties. There's an African proverb that says, when the elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers, meaning when powerful forces go to war, it's the people who suffer. Racial slurs held at Mark Golding. I remember back in 2008, and I found an article on it where John McCain was running against President Barack Obama, right? And the woman called Obama an Arab. She said he wasn't born in Hawaii and he wasn't a natural-born American and therefore he wasn't eligible to be president. And John McCain turned around and he said, no, ma'am, he's a decent family man, a citizen that I just happen to have disagreements with on fundamental issues, and that's what this campaign is all about. Continuing, Jamaica's import bill continues to outpace exports. Yet, the Minister of Tourism was talking in the Gleaner about the agricultural exchange, Alex, in an article called Small Farmers Generate Nearly 400 million in Sales. Which small farmers? All small farmers? I mean, do the maths, right? There's 154,000 small farmers in Jamaica, which means potentially they each earn $17 US. Link me if that makes sense to you, right? Because that'll make no sense to me. Okay, letter of the day. I'm going to leave you with something. This is a letter that was in the Gleaner on December 11. And it's called We Need Solutions to Everyday Issues. In the meantime, and I'm reading this article now, in the meantime, the country is preparing for a general election and we have the attendant distraction of members of government in court trying to overturn laws they created and push in massive public relations campaigns. The distractions are neither helpful or useful to my situation. I need a well-run city or country, not political drama. Government is a feature of the representation of the people of the country, and representation requires knowledge of the people's situations and circumstances, none of which are being addressed at this time. We are, instead, consumed with road fatalities, political dysfunction, murder, mayhem, and now distraction by the very people who should be addressing them. I'm looking for solutions to everyday issues, and reforming the Constitution won't do it. Court challenges against the Integrity Commission won't do it. So it's to be seen if Jamaicans will be able to figure out who we are to address the running of the country. I'll read that again. So it is to be seen if Jamaicans will be able to figure out who and how we're able to address the running of this country. But unlike some politicians who believe they alone can do it, our participation is required, not optional. And ironically, that's why we elected them to work for us to get solutions done. Someone needs to tell them that they work for us, not the other way around. Our business is why they are there, not theirs. That article was written by somebody called Fed Up with Distractions. I hope you're continuing to enjoy the journey, finding it educational and useful and ting. I know on this journey we've spoken about the Porsche, right? Heading down a one-way street. You know when you drive in some toll booths, and I'm laughing, Matter, but when you drive in some toll booths and the metal spikes, they have the metal spikes and it says, don't back up or you're going to F up your tires. Yeah, I feel like whoever's driving this Porsche right now, just put it in reverse and hit the gas pedal. The bill was tabled on United Nations International Human Rights Day, right? And on the 100th birthday of the fourth Prime Minister of Jamaica, the most honourable Michael Manley. Barbadian Prime Minister and rock star Mia Mottley delivered a masterful lecture at the Little Theatre in Kingston. Hailing Manley as one of her mentors, she noted that his first book, The Politics of Change, provides a timeless blueprint for leadership rooted in purpose, nationhood, and self-reliance through the empowerment of people. Using a statement that has come to define the Manley years, the word is love, she observed that progress doesn't require universal agreement, but instead collaboration as a region and a world. Here's some descriptions I found about Michael Manley. Tall, handsome, forceful and flamboyant, Michael Manley has been undoubtedly Jamaica's most eloquent, visionary, controversial and dynamic leader since independence. Visionary leader, global thinker, powerful champion of third world issues, champion of less developed nations, nicknamed Joshua, the humble leader and biblical prophet. Michael Manley and his government embarked on the most profound and wide-ranging program of social and economic reform in Jamaica's history. What else did I see about Michael Manley? He received the Order of the Liberator from Venezuela, the highest award granted in recognition of outstanding services provided to one's homeland. He received the Order of the Mexican Eagle, the highest Mexican order awarded to foreigners. He received the Order of Jose Marti, noblest distinction of the Cuban state. He received the United Nations Gold Medal for significant contribution in the cooperation with the United Nations and in solidarity with the South African Liberation Movement in the international campaign against apartheid. He received the Juliot Curie Peace Award of the World Peace Council for contribution to the struggle of the Jamaican people and all people of the non-aligned world fighting for economic independence. Was the tabling of this bill on such a date meant to have any significance to the birth date of such a great world-renowned Jamaican? Some massive people come out of this little island, you know. Marcus Garvey, Bob Marley, Usain Bolt, Elaine Thompson Harrar, our Mummy Rocket, Shelley Ann Fraser-Price. Michael Manley impacted not only this country of Jamaica, but the entire world. Malahoo Forte said, "There's no coincidence." The roads of Jamaica are considered a national emergency, according to the Prime Minister, right? This one definitely qualifies too. Our travels on the road to Jamaica becoming a republic continue, hoping the journey will end with a truly independent and sovereign Jamaica, land we love. Long episode, right? Sorry, people, but I had so much things to say. You can find this podcast on YouTube, Buzzsprout, Spotify, Podcast Index, Deezer, Podcast Addict, Apple, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music. If you want to reason about anything, or if you can't find any of the material I was talking about, you can email me on atasteofja@outlook.com. Until next time, I thank you sincerely for supporting this podcast. Please share it with your friends and family. Like it, give it a thumbs up on YouTube. And again, I thank you for taking the time to listen. One love. Yes, the word is love.